Welcome to Improv Your Parenting, the art of turning parenting into play. Today we're joined by Russ Gooberman. Russ is an improv teacher at Burbank's LA Connection, the longest running improv theater in Los Angeles. A longtime improviser at IO West and Second City Hollywood, Russ is on two of the longest running genre shows in the city, Drunkards and Dragons and Harry Potter Live. His YouTube sketches, music videos, and commercials have accrued over 200 million views. He's also a Shakespeare head and will be in production of Midsummer Night's Dream in June as Nick Bottom. For more, you can see Russ's Instagram page, or you can find out more about him at russgooberman.com. Finally, he's also a dad of 3 kiddos, ages 3, 6, and 8, and yearns for sleep. Just tell me about your parenting and or improv journey, how you came to the place where you're both of these things, an improviser and a parent.
Oh, they're related, it turns out. Part of the story. Improv journey. I've been in LA about 20 years. I started out as a stand-up. I would get rapidly bored of listening to my own material for the 8th or 9th or 10th time. Yeah. And so I'd find myself on stage abandoning my set and just starting to make fun of other comics or doing crowd work or just commenting on whatever was going on in the room. And so people suggested improv to me. They suggested what they knew about, which was Groundlings. I did Groundlings. Groundlings hated me because I was not an actor. I was a comedian, and they prefer actor types. Yeah. And so I had such a bad experience that I quit improv for 6 or 7 years. Yeah. And didn't return to it until I was living in New York, visiting with some family and some elderly grandmothers and things. And I took some workshops at Magnet Theater in Chelsea, which was just an awesome experience. It reinvigorated my love for improv. And then as I moved back to LA, I came back with a renewed vigor. I went through the whole program at IO West, and then I was on house teams there for several years after going through the program. And then since then, done a bunch of stuff at Second City. I run and or am on several of the longest running, largest, oldest indie teams, a bunch of genre stuff, including Drunkards and Dragons, which kind of is what it sounds like. It's a medieval fantasy role play improv show that's at least 12 years old now. And then also a Harry Potter themed show called The Show That Shall Not Be Named, which is in the second rehearsal for this team is where I met my future wife. So she obviously, okay, good. Plug it in, buddy. You know, we share a love. We're both artists, so we share a love for improv and nerdy type stuff. And we have 3 kids. The oldest of which is almost 8. She's in 2nd grade. Her name is Lulu. She's already an artist superstar and has done musicals with the Youth Academy of Dramatic Arts and is very funny. Julian is the middle child who's almost 6, and he's, speaking of neurodivergent, he is neurodivergent. So he has a double fun diagnosis of both autism spectrum level 1 and then also ADHD at the same time, so that's challenging for him. Yeah, for everybody else. And then we got Milo, who's turning 3 this week, and we're very lucky. We're also very overwhelmed and have no help. There are no grandparents within thousands of miles. Once in a blue moon, my mom will paratroop in from Florida and spend 3 days and get exhausted and go home, and we're like, do this every day.
This is our life. Yeah.
It's just, and I work from home. My wife teaches music to children at a religious school, so we're just all hands on. And then every spare second is devoted to I teach now at a theater in Burbank, which is called the LA Connection, which is technically the longest running improv theater in Los Angeles. It's going to celebrate its 50-year anniversary in a couple of years. Wow. And that's short form now. So that despite my history of doing long form stuff, I'm teaching short form, and I'm working with groups there and putting on weird improvised productions of Waiting for Godot and stuff. But it's every spare minute that isn't parenting or trying to pay bills is basically devoted to improv stuff.
Oh, I get it. Yeah. And it's funny, as we have these kids and as we have done this improv, I imagine not even necessarily by conscious choice, but just how to deal with the children, the improv has infused itself into your parenting experience.
100%.
Yeah. And I wonder if you could tell me a story about how you realized improv would be helpful or has been helpful as you've been working with your kids and trying to raise them.
I don't know that I've ever had that eureka moment or like that realization as such. It's just so in my bones at this point that, for instance, I have, despite the fact that I have one clinically neurodivergent child, like all of my kids are like a little bit something or other. And they're certainly OCD, which is I'm certainly OCD. They get stuck on things from time to time. And whether that's a tantrum or whether it's wanting a thing or whether it's being repetitive, I find that the improv skill of being able to jujitsu them by saying a silly version of the thing that they're saying, or by taking their side really hard instead of saying they can't have the thing for a second, just to scramble their point of view for a second. Like, that's all stuff that we would use to subvert the expectations of an audience and get laughs out of them that way.
Yeah.
But it works on kids for sure.
Yeah. And so as you're doing this jujitsu and as you're finding in this moment, I need to do this thing that might be unconventional, what have you found to be the key things that work with your kids?
So I'm a pretty silly dad, as you might imagine. And so I'm going to say this works and it doesn't work.
Okay.
What works about it is I'm a fun dad. My kids like me. They look to me as the fun, and sometimes mom is more of the disciplinarian and I'm more of the fun one. And then occasionally we'll switch roles when necessary.
Yeah.
What works about that is that I can get them to do things by making them games, which is a very improv kind of thing to do. What doesn't work about that is when I need things to be serious, sometimes it's hard to get that message across because I do a lot of pretending that I'm serious when I'm joking around, and a whole bunch of like absurdist serious dad character at them that they think is funny. And so then when I actually am like, okay, we actually have to do this right now, they're like, okay, buddy, whatever you say. So that can be
it's funny because I get the same thing as where my daughter will ask me, so you're playing right now, right? And like, oh no, now I'm being serious. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
No, believe me, like this is that moment where we're being serious. Yeah. And so how do you find working between that tension of the balance between being playful and then also I'm dad and I got to do dad stuff sometimes, you know?
Yeah, it's weird. It feels a lot like the kind of transitioning quickly between characters that you might do in a short form game, like a game like Four Corners, where the director is like pushing you through various scenes back and forth and you have to do these shifts. And I find myself doing things like that, especially when I know that I need to conjure like a little bit of a scary dad sometimes to get things like super serious. To just be like, put on my most serious face, but like internally I'm not feeling it. I'm not actually angry at the children, but I just need them to understand that this is a serious, important thing and that we need to like rally for this. And so I'm doing a lot of this Meisner stuff that I teach my students about, just like we take the shape of this character, even if we don't really feel that way internally, but a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. And have your kids started to recognize certain points where they've been able to turn the improv on you? And so they could use the game when you're not in the right place for it, but then they turn it around and say, oh, now we're playing. And you're like, do you ever have that?
Yeah, certainly. If one of my kids, especially my oldest daughter, comes up with a good zinger in the midst of like me trying to have a serious talk about like, you need to get your bedtime straightened out before winter break is over because your principal called everyone in the school and said, let's roll back bedtimes and let's get it straight. And then she jujitsu's on her own. Hold on, mister. Hold on. You want me to take this out? Yeah. Okay. She already on her own will come up with 8 reasons for why she doesn't have to go to bed. Or it's not that I'm not sleeping. It's just I tried and it didn't work. So now I just want to do what you're doing. And so she can pull the character on me. And then if she comes up with a really good joke, then I might be like, that's a good one. I'll give you 5 more minutes.
You win tonight.
Yeah, you gotta give them credit at times too, even if you are trying to be a disciplinarian at the time.
Definitely. Absolutely. And has there been any areas where you've been able to use role playing in your parenting that you can trace back to your improv experience and say, having done improv, I was able to do this with my kids and therefore we achieved this outcome that we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise?
I don't know if I can come up with a specific example of that for you. I do feel like improv has, and also just I have 10 years of experience in speech and debate before improv, so I've always been like public speaking in some form or other. But just like being able to explain things to them in their terms and their language and their vocabulary is something that is really important. So it's not that I'm explaining something to them as like why I think it's important. It's something like my middle son is obsessed with Sonic the Hedgehog and that whole Sega universe of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, sometimes I'll be like, well, how do you think Sonic is so fast and so strong? That's because he eats protein and vegetables. He has to be real. He needs so much energy to be so fast. He has to eat all of his broccoli. And then it's, oh, yeah, he probably does. Because it makes sense in the logic of the Sonic world. So I think that kind of thing is also like, I think parents who are not familiar with this kind of thing or shifting points of view are very often rigidly stuck in the parent wagging their finger at the child and they only have one gear.
Yeah.
Whereas improvisers have a selection of gears that they can choose from. If one is not really working, they can just switch it up and be like, all right, let's talk about it this way. And I think it's easier.
Yeah, definitely. And so do you find that you set out to do improv or it comes naturally in terms of the interaction and whatever's needed in that moment?
You mean with kids or like in life?
With kids. Yeah, with kids.
I rarely do I feel like I'm doing improv with kids. Like I'm not sitting there and being like, you be this character and I'll be this character, you know, and let's do a scene. Like we don't do scenes, but I play characters naturally with them all the time. One of the games we play is Daddy Monster, because they're obsessed with these kids horror YouTube series of cartoon. They're horrible, but they're all have collectible toys, and the kids and Lanky Box talks about them, and all the kids do whatever Lanky Box tells them to do. And so they love monsters. So I will be any assortment of 30 different monsters that will chase them around the living room, and some can be defeated with pillows, and some have 6 packs of soda can boxes on his arms and shoots lasers, and like basically like different kaiju that they have to defeat with their teamwork using their powers. And it's just like, that's very, again, it's not me doing an improv scene and trying to be clever and funny, but it definitely comes from all the physical work that we've done over the years.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, definitely. And so it sounds like when you get into a place where you might recognize a power struggle is developing, you're not setting out to here, now let's all play a game, but more of just saying, okay, what's needed in this moment? And what can I do now to either step away from the power struggle or diffuse it in a way that it's not a struggle, it's here, we're going to cooperate on something together. Is that true? If so,
I'm a big fan of diffusing it, especially when it's like we're at loggerheads, the tantrum is set in, the feet are stomping, everything is no. And then sometimes I'll just say no louder than my son who's saying no. And I'll be like, we'll do sometimes just like the classic parent reverse psychology thing where you're just like, it's like you absolutely cannot go to the doctor's office right now. Like I forbid you from going to the doctor's office right now. And the kid will be like, what if I want to go to the doctor's office? I'm like, it's not allowed. So yeah, it's a lot more of diffusing situations by subverting the expectations of children and of what they would expect the parent to say. Because you just can't have a tantrum at somebody who agrees with you. It just doesn't work.
No. I think you're completely right. Yeah, let's do that. Let's all have donuts for breakfast.
Yeah, exactly.
So I have a list of questions I'm looking at over here, which is why I keep looking over this way and make sure I get some down. How do you create opportunities for the kids to direct whatever's going on so that they're the ones leading rather than you during your interaction?
This gets a lot into the games that the kids drive, it's a lot of, I've learned this about dads, is that part of our role is to be like the donkey and the punching bag and the horse and the daddy monster occasionally. And it's a lot of physical play, way more so than what mom is doing. And again, it's not to generalize, but in most cases, it probably is that way, which is that we do a lot of physical play.
Yeah.
And my kids are also very physically agile and they can handle themselves and they have good balance because I would throw them on the bed and run and spin them around and turn them upside down over my shoulder. And it's also a good method, especially I think, again, it depends on the needs of a given child, but if it's like a neurodivergent or somebody on the spectrum or something like that, sometimes physical contact can break those kind of patterns in a way that just like trying to logic your way through the situation is never going to get you there. Sometimes with my son, who can get stuck in these ruts, he needs to be like swept off his feet for a second. Or if I ask him a question where he's like on top of me like this, like I might get a different answer than if he's just standing there with his arms folded. It's something that we talk about with my students. If you see an audience that's just doing this and they're just like, okay, show me the jokes, funny people. Sometimes you have to be vulnerable. You just have to show them a moment of reality, have a real relationship, and stop trying to make jokes for a second, just so that they think that there are stakes in what you're doing, and then they relax and they open their arms, and then you can get them with the joke. But they have to believe it's not all BS first. And I think a similar principle is probably true for kids, which is that you're going through these different levels of, we can have a serious, sincere, real conversation. We can both be characters. Maybe we can do both. And then maybe we'll find common ground in trying out a few of those different dynamics.
You mentioned this a little bit in terms of being attuned to the kids, to the way they're holding themselves. And how has improv helped you identify what it is your child needs?
Oh, so another one of these Meisner things that we do in class that I picked up from Jeff Mahalski, who's a old-time Second City patriarch dude, one of these first generation studied directly with Del Close guys, is he talks about reads, which is a Meisner technique where it's just, you look at somebody, you look at their facial expression, their demeanor, their body language, and you go, what's going on with them? And then in an improv scene, you just say it as exposition of like, you look worried or you look tired or whatever.
Yeah.
And it functions as if you feel disconnected in a scene, it can connect you with your scene partner, because now you're not just doing individual bits. Now you've commented on them. You've probably also given them a gift by telling them what they look like, and you've reconnected with them. That's obviously useful in parenting. If you're used to reading people's body language and their facial expression, I know when my daughter's lying to me. Are you kidding? She thinks she's so sneaky, but I see the little hint of a smile on her face when she's trying to seriously tell me that her room is cleaned up. And I'm like, what are we doing here? You're lying. Come on.
Yeah.
Come on.
It is fascinating because everyone does have some form of a tell. And if you're able to recognize that and then to play off of that in some way, you can get to where are we going next from here, rather than okay, I accept whatever you just said. We have the same thing with my son. He's so obvious when he's lying. Okay, I know. Let's discuss what just happened. Why did you choose to lie? So when you have those times where the tell is giving it out and you're confronted with, now we have a situation where it could be tense. What is it you do? We've talked a little bit about diffusion, but what is it you do to, I guess the question would be, what is your focus at that point? Is your focus the being right? Is your focus the relationship? Or is your focus an outcome? Where do you put your focus?
Really depends on the situation. It really depends. If we catch my daughter like serially lying, which has happened before, I don't want to make it into it. There comes a point, it's cute for a bit, and then it's not cute anymore. And then it's, we can't live our lives this way. And let's revisit the story of the boy who cried wolf or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's a serious analogy of why this is not a good way to lead your life. But then also, like you said, there's that moment of when we have the mutual recognition of, she knows she's lying. She knows that I know that she's lying. I know that she knows
that I know that,
that I see that she's lying. That's a moment of enjoyment. For a second, it's a moment of that we're enjoying each other, because it's also a game. It's just yet another game of she's trying to get away with something by lying to me, and it's funny that she was unable to do it. I guess if I were a more stern dad, it wouldn't be as much fun a game, because then some immediate terrible consequence would follow. Yeah. And I struggle with that sometimes, because I'm like, I do want this behavior to stop.
Yeah.
But the best that I can do most of the time is just to get like on a very sincere explanation of why this type of behavior will not serve you as you get older, as opposed to this is really tough because we know that kids with ADHD especially are like very responsive to threats and rewards because it's like immediate consequence. They don't have to process all of their like weighing things. They just know that there's either an immediate reward or an immediate thing they want to avoid.
Yeah.
I want to avoid that. I don't want all of my parenting to be about threats and rewards because it's just not optimal. Those are the games you do not want to be playing all the time.
Yeah.
I try as often as possible to mix in this is not the way. I promise you this is not going to work and here's why. Like, do you see that? But yeah, sometimes and a threat or a reward is like an easy fix to a given situation in the moment very often. But
we often think so, but it ends up actually causing more problems in a longer run. That we found in our home is that we've tried to completely step away from threats and rewards because we're like, it's just not working. And that leads to a question in terms of the differences between your kids in how do you change the way you interact depending on the kid you're with, what it is you're trying to do with that kid, particularly with the neurodivergent and having different needs and maybe taking things more literally than the other two?
I think that all three recognize my dad's style is pretty consistent. I definitely speak to them to their individual interests and their individual language, especially like what I was talking about with the Sonic analogy with my middle son. Because I talk about things in the terms of the monsters of Rainbow Friends, which is one of his favorite YouTube shows, and Sonic the Hedgehog and Milo. We talk about, in addition to batteries and mechanical things, he's obsessed with Mario Kart and has a bunch of Mario Kart Hot Wheels toys that he obsessively collects. We talk about the different personalities of the different drivers of Mario Karts and their different cars and things like that. Yeah, I bring it to their interest. I don't think my style is dramatically different, even though they're very different children.
Yeah.
They're very different children. I can have a more adult conversation with the oldest because she is precocious and advanced and the oldest on top of it. So she's way ahead of the game. So I can talk to her in a more adult framework. But I also don't really believe in talking down to children.
Yeah.
So I really try. I don't want to use vocabulary that they don't understand, but at the same time, I want to talk to them like they're sentient, self-aware beings that are not babies. And that's the way that, whenever I've taught children, my grandfather was like this too. Like he just talks to children like they're people. And so I probably got that from him.
That leads to another question. I have a couple in my head right now that I want to talk about. First one is I want to recognize one thing you said, which is that it sounds to me like you're meeting them where they are on their language level, in their interests. So you're not trying to be like, over here, come to me, but actually going to where they are and saying, okay, how do we interact from this place? But not changing who you are in that process. And still being cool, fun dad in part of that. But you also mentioned your grandfather, and I'd love to hear who were your influences in terms of your parenting style. And did any of those influences play with you, or is that something you've brought to this parenting experience?
Definitely my grandfather. He would be the primary inspiration for much of the way that I am in general. He was a very funny guy. He wasn't a comedian or anything, but he was just like, he was in the Bakers Union. He was a baker in Brooklyn for years, and he would be the guy who would walk to the pizza place and ask them for a hot dog just because he liked to mess with people and get random cashiers to laugh at him. And he'd be like, you think he had this heavy Austrian accent. He'd be like, you pay cash? And I go, yeah, every time I pay with cash, it costs me money. And we called them Walterisms, that he just had one-liners. And yeah, like a lot of my sense of humor came from him. And he was like he didn't love adults, but he was very fond of children. And I probably had something to do with the fact that he was like a Holocaust survivor and had seen awful, horrible things in his youth. Like a lot of his youth was robbed from him. And weirdly, he had a kind of tempestuous relationship with his daughters, with my mom and my aunt. And then when I was born, he had a completely different relationship with me. I don't know if it was because I was a boy or if it was because he wasn't like directly responsible for me, so he could just enjoy it.
Do whatever you want.
But it was the dynamic was weird in that my mom and my aunt were like somewhat jealous of the way that he interacted with me, because they did not get as much of a loving, adoring father as I got from him. Which in some cases I was missing from my own dad, so he'd stepped in that way also. Yeah.
You know, it's fascinating you say that, is because that's actually very similar to my experience with my grandfather, in my parents' experience, in my experience with my dad. At another time, I'd love to talk with you about our shared histories there.
Sure.
Also, some Holocaust survivorship that went on there, and a lot of comedy, or at least amusement in the family, from a mentality of, I'm a survivor and therefore I'm going to greet the world with humor. One of the last questions I have is just what are your priorities as a parent? What drives you in being a parent, in terms of, this is the kind of parent I want to be, this is the kind of outcomes I want to achieve as a parent?
A lot of them are doing the opposite of what my parents did.
Yes.
I hate to frame everything in like a negative way like that, but it really is. It's my parents were divorced when I was 5.
Yeah.
I was constantly shipped back and forth between two families that were not fond of each other, and I was given the role of ambassador, as a freaking 6-7-year-old, as the only one that could pass messages back and forth while everyone was talking smack about each other. I hated every minute of it.
Horrible position.
And I made a vow at a very young age to myself that my children would not have to do any of this stuff. My goals are pretty. I just really wanted to live a 1980s middle class lifestyle where we had a house, there was a family unit that was together in the house, and then also that the children were like supported in their interests. And it was like, I was like a gifted kid in school, but my parents took that as, he's gifted, he can do whatever he wants, instead of let's figure out what his interests are and how we can cultivate these things, and what tutors, what mentors, like who can we, like that never happened for me. And so that's something that I hope to be better at with my kids, for whatever skills they have.
That's an admirable goal. And it sounds like you work on that every day with them. So I think they're very lucky to have that approach to their parenting. Very cool. Is there anything you'd like to say to parents, either improvisers or non-improvisers, or just anybody who's a caregiver, about something you might have learned in your journey that you'd just be like, oh God, if you just knew this, it would be so helpful to you? Other
than just proselytizing for improv, which I'm sure you're doing.
Take a class.
It's human training, and you do not have to want to be a performing comedian to get use out of improv training. It's really useful for everyday things.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have any other life hacks available. Life hacks.
Oh, no.
Other than hide the candy in a high shelf, because when you have multiple children, they team up like raccoons to climb up into cabinets and get things that they're not supposed to get. It's interesting just being out, like having 3, and that's the point where you're outnumbered.
Yeah, playing zone.
Yeah, exactly right. You're playing zone, no more man-to-man.
Yeah.
And then there's always plausible deniability when something happens, because they can always point fingers and you never know what went on. So it's a whole new dimension of stuff. So if you want it to be easy, stick with 1, I would say.
There you go. Very cool.